Well, good morning, church. I hope that you're having a good Tuesday. I'm recording this on Monday, but hopefully you'll be able to watch this on Tuesday. But we're going to continue our devotional series into the Ten Commandments. So this week we've been looking at the second table of the law. So remember, those first four commandments are vertical commandments that mainly deal with our relationship to God. And then the second table has these horizontal commandments that deal firstly with our relationship to one another. Monday, we looked at the sixth commandment, which it says, "You shall not murder." And we said that this really applies in a couple of ways, that we shouldn't take life unlawfully on one hand. And then on the other hand, we have the responsibility to protect life in all its stages. And then we also saw how Jesus shows us the depth of the command by telling us that anger is also a violation of the sixth commandment because it's the root of murder. Well, this morning we're going to look at the seventh commandment. It's found in Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. Again, it's a short commandment. It just says, "You shall not commit adultery." Thomas Watson once wrote concerning the seventh commandment, "It's a matter for lamentation to see this commandment so slighted and violated among us. Adultery is the sin of the times." In other words, Watson was really concerned about the sin of adultery. He's basically saying it's a widespread sin. Now, what I find interesting about that is that Watson didn't write these words yesterday. He wasn't commenting on 21st century America. He wasn't commenting even, 50 or 100 years ago. No, Watson was an English Puritan who died in 1686. Right. And so I bring that up because we have to understand that breaking the seventh commandment is nothing new. Right. This has been an issue for a long, long period of time. But the seventh commandment also reminds us of the sanctity of sex and marriage. And that's what it's really about. Specifically, this commandment prohibits adultery. Right. And adultery refers to a sexual relationship outside of marriage in which one or both of the partners is married to someone else. And so the commandment is prohibiting a married person from having a sexual relationship outside of the one that they would have with their spouse. But throughout church history, Christians have viewed this commandment as actually prohibiting not just that specific sexual sin, but prohibiting a wide range of sexual sin, including things like fornication, homosexuality, prostitution, pornography, on and on. Well, in the Gospels, Jesus explains the seventh commandment more fully, or explains it to us in the Sermon on the Mount. And much like he does with the sixth commandment, he shows us the depth of the commandment. So he says this: "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." So Jesus condemns not only adultery, but the root of adultery, which is lust. Right? He shows us again that it isn't just about the physical action, but there's a heart attitude behind this physical action as well. And that makes sense, right? Because the physical action of adultery doesn't just happen, right? A person doesn't just commit adultery out of thin air. Adultery happens in the heart well before the physical action of adultery actually takes place. And again, when Jesus says this to us, we remember how the Ten Commandments show us our need for Jesus, don't they? I mean, on the surface of it, a person might read the seventh commandment and think, well, I'm not cheating on my spouse, so I'm good. But then Jesus says that, we can break the seventh commandment when we lust. And so then we see kind of our depravity and how often we do this and how often we lust. And we see our depravity and we see our need ultimately for Jesus in his righteousness, because we can't be righteous on our own. Well, now we want to ask, why does God care so much about marriage? Why is this prohibition against adultery one of the Ten Commandments? Why does he care so much about marriage? Well, it was God who established marriage. Marriage is not something that man made up. It's a divine institution. It's sacred in that way, and it provides the fertile soil for the most basic unit of society, which is the family. So marriage is important for that. But I think it even goes further than that. Paul, in his letter to Ephesians, teaches us that marriage is actually a picture of the gospel. In Ephesians 5, he's explaining the responsibilities of Christian husbands and Christian wives. And then he talks about Genesis 2, which speaks about the institution of marriage. And he says this, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." That's Genesis 2, right? But then he goes on and says this, "This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church." Now, that's an absolutely amazing statement, I think. The marriage relationship is a picture of what Christ has done for his church. So our marriages should mirror the gospel. It should be, marriages should be self-sacrificing, loving, faithful, these things. And again, because marriage is a picture of the gospel, we have no right to mess with it or change it in any way. And because Christ is always faithful to his bride, we ought to be faithful to our spouses as well. And so when we begin to understand these truths about the institution of marriage and really the background of marriage, we understand this is why God cares about marriage and faithfulness in marriage. Marriage is something sacred, and we should treat it that way. Well, that's it for today. Until tomorrow, grace and peace to you.